great.
And we're gonna start admitting folks.
Great, cool.
Hi, hey, thank you so much for joining us at 6 p.m. on the nose. I'm sure some more folks will be coming in the near future. It's Thursday night, the 9th. Oh, no, it's the 10th of June. And I'm Carolina.
Solar eclipse.
I know. Oh my gosh, I forgot. And we're we're talking our Thursday weekly art fair conversations with artists. And tonight I'm so happy to have Kim Hoeckele.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah.
And when I first asked you how to pronounce your last name, you were like, how is it really in German? What was it meant to?
So it should have an umlaut, and I think that it has like a Hoeckele. My family is, German kind of in name only, mostly. I mean, that part of my heritage wasn't really passed down. So Hoeckele was always the way my parents pronounced it. And it was always like, don't heckle me. So that's how I pass it on. Maybe for tonight, don't heckle me. So I sort of like being heckled.
I know, it's a really unique last name though. And it really helps you find that stamp in the art world, because I don't think anyone else has your name. Like I know there's Summer Wheat.
True.
And there's another,
really?
There's another wheat around, but I also got made fun of a lot when I was growing up with the wheat. I was called buckwheat, buckwheat. And it was like, Wheaties, go tell your mama what the big boys eat. And I'm like, you're nasty. But anyway, so, it's just the last name game. So anyway, we're here ready to chat about your extremely powerful work, sometimes very activist, very feminist, very thoughtful work. But one of the things I kind of like to warm up with is it looks like you're in your studio right now, which is a blessing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's been, we moved, I share my studio with my partner, and we moved studios.
Kim, I think we lost ya. There you are.
Did I freeze there? I froze for a second. I'm gonna swap. I meant to say this to you. I'm just gonna swap to my. Speaking of being in a studio, sometimes the internet is. Okay, great.
We've been having some internet issues lately. It hasn't been a fun game. But nonetheless, you're in your studio and we got some Wi-Fi.
Yes. Yes. Well, yes. And it's been like such a savior over the last year, because our previous studio, what I was saying when I froze, was it was sort of like a health and safety hazard. Once we got to COVID, it was not a good situation. And so we moved in kind of the thick of COVID and had this like little safe, quiet place for the last year. So it's really good.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's wonderful. And so now it's more private.
Yes, more private, beautiful light, very hot. Like right now, very, very, very hot. No AC.
Oh man,
all the good New York stuff.
Yeah, the muggy air that we've been experiencing the last few days. When that rain comes, it's like, bring it on.
Yeah.
Where is it located? I know you're in New York. You're in Brooklyn.
I'm on Grand and Morgan, so it's in the ISCP building, but on the others, like not the ISCP part.
Sure, we used to have a studio in there for for like 8 years. We were in there. We genuinely just 2 weeks ago moved our very last thing out of there, the giant flat file.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was, we couldn't let it go. It was, we subletted the space. The artist was really into it, but then they were like, it's taking up too much room. You gotta get it out of here.
Yeah, totally.
That building is a really classic building for artists, which, used to be East Williamsburg. Now it's really Bushwick.
Yeah.
And, with all those trucks going by all the time, biking over there is always kind of a trouble, but that building is very hot.
Yeah. Building is hot. Though we've been watching there are several families, I believe, of Canadian geese that live on the Newtown Creek, which is both amazing and kind of gross. And they just had a lot of babies. So on my walk every day, I'm watching the goslings grow up on the very polluted waterway.
Yeah, that is. And there's like a stripper bar, isn't there, like
Yep,
pumps thing?
pumps.
So whenever I would post anything from the studio, it would be like, where are you? Exotic dancing.
Yeah. Well, Pumps is, I think, out of luck right now. I mean, I don't know. I assume they'll reopen, but who knows?
Well,
Maybe.
a perfect segue to maybe start talking about some of your work, which, as I said there, I think, it's really got a wonderful feminist bend. And I've been lucky enough to bring it to Miami and show it at NADA with Artfare. And it was when I was mostly introduced to your work, since you've been on Artfare, although we've crossed paths over the years, I suppose, through mutual friends and otherwise. But the series Epic Stage Shell was really what what you have on Artfare right now, for sale. Some really fantastic work, and I'm hoping that we can just dive right into those photographs.
Yeah, sure.
Photographs.
Let me share my screen. And I'm actually, let's see, let me reorganize everything on my screen here. Okay, let's zoom back out. Yeah, this is an install. Yeah, this is a recent place to start, even though the work, it's a couple of, I started it in 2018. This was a presentation from 2021. And maybe I'll just jump down to the work and we can talk about the presentation in tandem. But this work started when I actually came across this collection of children's encyclopedias that were picture encyclopedias from the 1920s called the Book of Knowledge. I think the Book of Knowledge has carried on through the 60s and 70s. But because this one was from the 20s, they had these like beautiful photo etchings for all of these like Western art historian like David and all of these like Greco-Roman sculptures. And I was at a residency and I essentially didn't want to bring the encyclopedias back with me. So I started ripping out all of the etchings to take. And when I got back to my studio, I was looking at these like amazing old prints, and then alongside ripping out images in fashion magazines and thinking about influential, here I'm showing like Kate Moss CK1 era, which was really influential to me growing up. I was like a Kate Moss era teenager. And I just started looking at these different images and making comparisons across time and thinking about the poses and gestures that kind of originate from Greco-Roman sculpture and then have carried through our history and then into advertising, particularly fashion advertising of women's bodies or products that women sell. And I began to perform these photographs. So this is a great, this is Contrapposto, which was invented to create dynamicism in sculptures, but it's also in furniture. And so if I go back to this Kate Moss, it's like she's kind of twisted in Contrapposto. It's meant to create, it's where your hip is jutted out, like in this sculpture, and your shoulders jut the other way. So and we see this all the time in like contemporary fashion.
Yeah, what is a quick fun fact about Kira? Yeah. My mother sent me to finishing school. I don't know what you call this. It's like such a waspy
Whoa.
thing.
Yeah.
It was really horrible. Like I had to learn how to hold my spoon and set the plates and do the thing and be able to go to nice dinners, basically. But I learned Contrapposto there because when you had to like runway walk and normal walk, how you do the whatever it is kind of my go-to when people have to take full body pictures of me.
Well, it's also honestly very comfortable. Like I realize when I'm making the photographs, I'm like, well, it is actually just kind of a comfortable way to stand.
Yeah, but I pretty much forgot everything I knew, obviously, through like year of doing these things. I'm like,
I do think that we like hold those things in our, that's really where this work in some ways comes in. So I started like reperforming these poses and gestures for the camera. And then I wanted to, well, in this case, I'll just stick with this photograph for a second. I cut them up and reassembled them into new compositions. And so some cases I'm really, the cuts become like violent or act as an erasure. In other cases like this one, I'm sort of like putting a body back together. And I'm trying to more directly reference this, in this case, like the idea of this ancient statuary. But this would be one where sort of these cuts have like a more, I sort of think that I'm thinking about drapery. The title is Draped Woman Loose Folds, but they do have kind of like a slashing motion that could be more violent, or maybe I'll stick with the word violent.
Yeah,
You
certainly do have that aggressive feeling. I think any cuts in, even a two-dimensional black and white photograph, it certainly gives off that. Yet with the title, as you titled it, it seems like it's much deeper. Also, I had a question. These models are, who are your models? Who are you shooting?
It's all me. And yes, so thank you for asking that. I skipped it. I started shooting myself out of necessity, availability. But as I started making more of the work, this has actually been an ongoing question, and I won't say concern in the work. I won't skipped another. I feel pretty resolved with it, but initially I wanted to bring in a lot of different sizes, ages, races, like different bodies representing like different female identifying experiences.
Sure.
And that's still sort of in the hopper, but I think because, at least with this work, I have cut into these photographs. I really was, at the time that I was making it, it was very hard for me to reconcile making photographs of other women and then cutting up those photographs, even though like I know the intent of the work and I understand that it would be in some ways collaborative. For me, this became, even though I initially really resisted that it was self-portraiture, it really is sort of my reckoning with my influences, and I get to sort of perform both as the subject and the author of the work.
Mm-hmm. And so you've got these black and white images you were looking at, a torso with the belly button, really beautiful grayscale going on. I mean, obviously the photograph is magnificent in relationship to its shots as well as its development and its print. And it's an archival pigment print. What are you shooting with?
So I started shooting this work on film, and yeah, it's not anymore, but that's how I think that's also important to the work that I started that way, because it is really important. So I'm photographing in many times multiple kind of the same pose, multiple images of the same pose, and I change the lighting where sometimes it's a little more stark or commercial looking, and other times it's more dramatic. And then I print these photographs out and cut into them, reposition them, and then rephotograph. So there's a lot of kind of steps and processes with them. And I don't know that I would have gotten to this process had I not been in shooting an analog way, where I was forced to go into a dark room, make a physical print and cut it up, versus shooting digitally where I could go into Photoshop and manipulate something. But because of the multi-step process, I eventually switched to digital. So I am shooting digitally, and then the process still stands. I'm shooting with studio lights, and I'm intentionally trying to light things and shift shadows so that it's like can be a little disorienting. It's in some cases harder to position yourself, or where the light is coming from, or where you're coming from when you're looking at the photograph.
Mm-hmm. So you're shooting yourself, then you're using a self timer or something like this, like a
Mm-hmm.
And this piece we're looking at with aerial torso with drywall and concrete grounds. I'm assuming then behind this print, it's on like a mat of concrete. What?
So yeah, I mean, I wish I could have gotten like really like show and telly here, but I'll try if you can see my cursor. So this print, so the references I don't have, this is one of the photographs I don't have my references for, but it's an old funeral stele, a Greek funeral stele, or it's Etruscan. And the language on the stele, the funerary stele, is unreadable. So they think it's Etruscan, but it's some kind of hybrid. And so I was looking at that and thinking about this like accessibility of language. And then also, well, and that led me to think about different accessibility. And Arial is the most accessible typeface in terms of accessibility, or it's one of the most accessible ones are used. So this is essentially the Arial typeface with the things that make it legible cut out, these shapes. So all these shapes are cut into the torso. And then this is a photograph that was, so the complete photograph was hung on the wall and photographed. And then the complete photograph without this cut in the middle was put on a concrete ground and photographed, and then pieced back together and then rephotographed. Oh, excuse me. So, I mean, the more the steps go, it gets, I think it becomes kind of like boring. It's like, or not boring, but like, it's too much, right? Like, I like that there's sort of like a mystery of how it's made rather than saying like I did step 1, step 2, step 3. But I also, the mark of the hand, none of the cuts are perfect. Like you can kind of see the cuts in these little spaces. So it's really important to me that maybe someone that's looking at it can kind of think about all those, like the construction or what they're looking at. Or for me, concrete makes me think of a contemporary material versus marble, which could be considered like an ancient material, but not necessarily that it's like the place that you reside in looking is how is it made?
Yeah, and the cuts themselves are throughout the work dropping shadows within the documentation, at least of the work. But I know, having seen the work in person, it's a really lively conversation between those layers.
Yeah,
and move around what is a two-dimensional work to have these cutouts, and it is a really nice contemporary approach to presenting the photographs as and yet it's in a conversation still with contemporary painters today that are dropping these shadows like crazy.
I know.
It's like spray, drop shadow, 5 layers, painting, color fields, and within abstractions, at least, abstractive work. So and I just noticing that through your slideshow right now. Can you speak to that a little bit? Like the drop shadow, or even the folds. The folds look different from different angles while you're looking at the work.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you brought up painting, because I was just looking at like Carrie Moyer posted something, and I was looking at all of her drop shadows. But and I'll loop back to that. I mean, I think about performance and sculpture more in this work, but the rationale or the idea behind the shadows or creating these shadows, I don't know what's next here. Maybe this is an okay one to think about that with, but I don't, there's no part of me that thinks a viewer is gonna like maybe cognitively come to this when they look at it, but in some of the photographs there are multiple layers or layers that reveal different things. And so my idea with the shadows is that somehow that acts as like a timeline of some, like rather than having a linear timeline, but you're kind of like smashing. I'm trying to think about how to like create 3-dimensional space or time in a 2-dimensional plane.
How about photography? Because the moment.
Right. Well, and so I mean, I think in some ways, I think this work is so, I mean, it's very graphic. I mean that in terms of design, like it's very formal.
It is, I agree.
And it's very photographic, but it's like also I'm pushing so much against like this singular moment, or even the idea of like a singular maker, because even though I'm making it and I'm in them, I'm really, because I'm siphoning all of these references, I'm really pushing against this idea of like the artistic genius and like pointing really, even though they are very distilled, I'm really thinking about where I'm positioning myself in a lineage of other influences and makers, which I don't know if that gets me back to painting in an explicit way. In some ways, I feel like some of those drop shadows, that fashion of painting almost comes from a photographic, like sort of a, I don't know, I'll get myself in trouble if I start talking about painting.
Well, yeah, it's okay. I hear where you're going with that. But these, this particular work, I know was this one that was in the contact in Toronto, or you had had this opportunity in Toronto to present work on billboards, and it was this body of work, Epic.
That's right.
Shell. and yeah, they really just are so powerful on the billboard. So it's, it's just not something you would expect,
Yeah.
certainly. And yeah, they fit so nicely against the architecture.
Yeah, it was a really it was supposed to happen last in 2020. And so it was actually really interesting. I was lucky that it wasn't canceled and that it was just delayed. But it was weird to kind of pick it up after all the decisions had been made a year later and the work is a year older and we're all in this different place. And
Yeah.
but it really was a great experience because it kind of, well, I didn't get to go because it was Toronto, the Canadian border is shut. So it allowed me to re-engage with my work in a way that's not tangible. I don't know how to
Mhm.
or to see it in a new context, but I'm not. What I was really looking forward to about seeing this work was like, I understand the scale of those people in this documentation photograph, but I can't really understand standing there and seeing that scale shift of this work.
Mhm.
And the idea of positioning the work on these billboards, it was for the Contact Photography Festival this year, was to take this work that does nod towards fashion photography or commercial photography and put these sort of these conceptual photographs into a commercial setting. And
Mhm.
so my initial excitement was being able to like see that scale shift as a way to, as an evolution of the work, which I see visually, but I'm seeing my experience of it is the way that yours is, which is like through this documentation. So it's been a different kind of recontextualization. I don't know that that's clear, but like
Mhm.
I'm seeing it as a viewer, I guess is maybe the cleanest way to say it.
Yeah, that makes
um, and it was really like the art. This building is great. There was two on this building, which we were
oh
really, yeah, this was such a great this one was like sort of the winner where it was so serendipitous to have this building that had this beautiful glass paned exterior and have this gridded photograph here.
mhm.
um
It belongs,
it
right?
belongs, and
So
that's a,
matchy, matchy, you say.
yeah, well, it was so much about like thinking about site specificity was something that was not made to be site specific.
Mhm.
Um, and this one really kind of, I think, hit the mark where we were really able to think about this building that I think has had, as far as I understand, many different lives. I think it was going to be lost. It was going to be this. It was going to be that. And like the industrial building having its own history, and then sort of like my photographs speaking to that or having their own history and speaking together or being in conversation.
Mhm.
And there were 5 of them, and the others were in more commercial areas in town, which I think, as far as I understand, that many people were around, but also Toronto was pretty closed down. So I think that they were less populated than they would have been
Mhm.
otherwise, but
Mhm.
still happened.
Do you know or have you heard any response from the work? And I'm not sure if you said it. I don't know if I heard or maybe I forgot all of a sudden, but how long were they up?
So they were up for the month of May. Just so they just came down. They came down like right away.
Oh,
um, and I think part of that has to do with contact because they didn't, because they postponed a lot of their work rather than canceling things. They've actually done this great thing where they're kind of extending out the festival. So I think there's like another round of things going up. Um, the
mhm.
individual response to this work has been great, and it's been very, very exciting to I'm going to go back to the one at the beginning here. Forgive me while I flip back to the
All good.
this
Just
this
it's
guy.
so fresh to see these black and white works as, a work of art on these massive billboards.
Yeah,
Uh, and I know there's, Four Freedoms and Hank Willis Thomas, and there's a lot of activism going on within
yeah,
public realm and in public spaces with billboards now. And just such a delight to see it. It's not unusual. It's not a new thing, right? Yet to see these black and white figurative photographs being
yeah.
spliced, nice, translated in the sky with these lines, with the buildings. Um, I think they're just really stunning. They feel
Thank you.
really, they just feel like art on a billboard, right? It doesn't feel like, I understand that they kind of wanted a commercial feel or fashion photography feel, yet
They
it's
don't.
from that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that's kind of the great, for me, the thing about this work is that the images themselves are so distilled, but I'm looking at so many things that go into these really, really pared down photos. And so you're totally right. Like, I love that they don't really, I mean, they don't really speak the language of commercial photography ultimately as objects at all, as photographs. But because they're in conversation with that conceptually, I think that was the framework of placing them here. And I think you're right. They have the ability to hopefully, I hope, have people kind of stop and look at them because they aren't an advertisement, or they aren't colorful, or they aren't speaking that formal language. But I think, that was one of the challenges. And so once they were up, the reception's been great. But I mean, one of the controversies around them was that, and this is not related to my work specifically, but I guess there was another photo festival in Vancouver recently before this work, or before the Contact went up, maybe in earlier spring, and there was some kind of controversial work that went on a billboard, and I don't know the details of it. I probably should, but and so, and even though the company that sponsors these billboards for the Contact Photo Festival has done this for years, after this happened in Vancouver, they wanted to pull a handful of the billboard projects, one of them being mine, because of the content of the work, and they didn't want to put women's bodies on billboards.
Oh, come on.
Yeah. I mean, it's great. It's sort of a great moment, or I mean, it's not. It was very frustrating, and I felt very, very supported by the festival because they were just as frustrated. And their workaround was that historically they haven't had to put any signage on the billboards, and now they had to put our names and contact on it. And
that's what the
I think it was, yeah. So it's like
okay.
my favorite part of it, honestly, like the part that I tried to complain about, which is so silly, is I was like, but I don't understand, why is it underlined like a hyperlink? No one can click on the billboard. Can you just make it? And they were like, no, this is what they approved. I was like, okay.
Wow.
But there's part of me that has to laugh and like kind of love it. I mean, I hate it because it's ridiculous, but it is sort of reinforcing the work to me, because this work is clearly not explicit. It's not, and if it were, I mean, that's a whole other conversation, but to which I still would believe that they should go on billboards, would be my take. But this work is very tame. And even when the curator Ben and I were talking about placement, he was giving me like the promo pack for the, like, this is one location, but it had advertisements on it in their promo, and it was of a lingerie. It was like, it wasn't Victoria's Secret, but it was like a buxom woman in a bra, and he's like talking about how they won't put them up. So there's this great moment of like, as long as you're selling something, if a woman's body can sell it, then it's acceptable and it's not a problem. But if there's nothing to sell, they were really concerned that there was no head in them. Like, but I mean, I have decapitated myself in most of them, but
yeah, they're not explicit, as you said. I mean, there are no breasts, there's no money shots. I mean, they're clearly very elegant, but I can understand, as we were kind of discussing from the beginning, they do present a subtlety of violence. But certainly it's very artistic, and it's the billboard company was harassing curators of Contact, and so Contact went to bat for you, basically.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think they really, really supported the work, but also it is a ridiculous, like, I think all of us, I don't know, and I obviously we're in an art world, whatever, but I think everybody knew it was like an overreach of something that was going to be a problem. And there's so many different public billboard projects that I think that they really, wanted to support having this happen, particularly coming out of COVID, having like a lot of art around the city for people to see.
Right.
Online, yeah.
Well, that's a really interesting story there. That something like a lingerie ad would be able to.
Yeah, of course.
No problem, and just as you stated, like something that's selling something, just
right,
capitalist, is okay, but something that's thought-provoking or asking your viewer to stop, look, they don't even have to think, they just can enjoy,
yeah,
or consider, would be, against any kind of billboards, function.
yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting for me just because it's, I think that when I start a project of any kind, there's exploration. I don't really know where it's going to go. And as I'm thinking about, like, for example, if I'm thinking about photographing other people, I'm thinking about the implications of putting them into the world, but never in my mind am I thinking about that I'm making work that would be censored in some way. So it's sort of wild that I'm having to like more and more have this conversation. Yeah. It's probably changing the work. It's probably in some ways ultimately making the work more explicit because I find it to be like frustrating, but also sort of highly entertaining. I don't know, a little bit of both.
Sure, and I suppose it's kind of helping inform some of your newer body of work, the Nike.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the Nike is a pretty good segue to. Sorry, I'm like scrolling through here. It came out of going from Contact to like this photograph, which is from Epic Stage Shell. I made this video that was sort of inspired. I guess, yeah, it's funny to say inspired by, because in some ways the video is sort of articulating all of my winding associative research into or these different references that I'm bringing in. This is a still from that video. So I made this, I really do think of it as, it's very highly constructed, but I think about it as like an absurdist journey through my studio. And it's totally constructed out of found images, found website like recordings, screen recordings, and then text. So there's a voiceover that's a script that I composited out of different either advertising, like some of the text is from shapewear websites, and some of the text is from like essays about marketing to women for Nike for athletic wear. And so it's taking the idea of Nike, the goddess of victory, and Nike, the athletic wear brand, as its kind of starting point, and then unwinding from there. I did bring a couple of clips. Okay, I maybe do you think you can hold like 3 whole minutes? Like watch 3 whole minutes?
I think so. I don't know if any of our viewers want to give a heads up, like shout out, clap, whatever. I mean, I think, having watched the entire video, I think that, 2, 3, any minutes is really thought provoking.
Well, the 2 clips I brought, and I'll play them back to back, so they'll just go continuously, it's the first minute, so it can kind of give you a sense of how it starts. And then the second clip is from about 2/3 of the way through, so it gives a sense of like how it unwinds. So I'm gonna stop my share and then reshare. I'm gonna take these out because the video doesn't work.
Right.
Oh.
There we go.
Okay, so it's just under 3 minutes.
In Greek mythology, Nike is the goddess of speed, strength, and victory. She is also known as winged goddess. Would it be easier for you if I wasn't so fast? Would it be simpler if I stopped winning? Would you be more comfortable if I was less proud? Ancient Greeks worshipped Nike because they believed she could make them immortal and was able to grant to humans the strength and the speed needed to be victorious in any task they undertook. Despite their faith in the goddess Nike's abilities to grant strength and lead paths to victory, these ideas did not extend to mortal women. Prior to 1987, there were no Nike advertisements directed towards women because it was believed that it would compromise Nike's authentic and serious sports image. The prevailing mindset and myth were that women were not physiologically able to run 26.2 miles. They said women couldn't do something that arduous, that it meant turn a woman's features into that of a man. A doctor had told me straight away that my uterus would fall out. Unlike the motion studies of Edward Muybridge, who depicted movement as a series of discrete moments on a separate sequential negatives, Murray's analysis of motion are characterized by multiple exposures on a single photographic plate. Marcel Duchamp attributes influence on Murray on his work Nude Descending a Staircase. Of this, he says, "My aim was a static representation of movement, a static composition of indications of various positions taken by a form in movement. A nude never descends the stairs. A nude reclines. The indefinable mass which loosens the edge of her body can also be described as a certain kind of dissolving into non-entity." To top off these concerns, female anatomy and reproduction baffled scientists of the day. A woman's ovaries and uterus were believed to control her mental and physical health. Plato's dialogue Timaeus compares a woman's uterus to a living creature that wanders throughout a woman's body, blocking passages, obstructing breathing, and causing disease. The standard cure for this hysterical suffocation was scent therapy, in which good smells were placed under a woman's genitals and bad odors at the nose. On the basis of no scientific evidence whatsoever, doctors of physiology related biology to behavior, figuring that women who displayed symptoms of aggression, ambition, and competitiveness were incompletely developed and prone to disease. A woman who engaged in sport, therefore, could be sterile or transmit her unfavorable characteristics to her children. And the female competitors appeared unsurprisingly sweaty and out of breath. The distance was perceived as too much for the women.
The it's really like, you know, a photo montage. It's almost like a, what do they call the vision boards, or a type of inspiration board, but it's electronic, right? And then you're able to add sound. And are you narrating this? Are you recording your own voice, or whose voice is that?
No, okay, so I initially, it's not me. It's an actor I worked with for another project, a performer. I basically made the video in quarantine and had to do it pretty quickly, and then tried to narrate it. I'm real lispy. So I was like, I can't get through this script. I can't do it. Like I can't. And so I got her to do it. But you can even tell at moments like I made the video and I wanted her to hit certain things at certain times. So there's times when she's really having to condense and expand because I had constructed it already.
And a lot of this found footage, then you talk a little bit about your process. You're shooting yourself, looking through, you know, your research, you're doing screenshots, throwing them in, you know, this kind of time movie. Talk a little bit about the things that you're finding and how you're compiling.
Well, it's both digital and analog. So I have a giant file that is not very well organized, where I try to keep just like ongoing. It's almost like body categorizations rather than like historical or so I can kind of like pull from things. And then I have like a giant file on my desktop or in my computer that's photo research, where I'm just like grabbing things constantly and dumping them in and sometimes printing them out. And initially, at least, they can manifest in all kinds of different ways in different projects. For the black and white work, for Epic Stage Shell, I was genuinely like, as I was, sketching from them, or pulling things out, trying to figure out what kinds of like, I'm thinking of it as mark making, but cuts would make sense in either conceptually or visually with the other references I was pulling out. So it really can feel a lot like this video where I'm just like piling through things and then they get me really far flung and I can make these more associative relationships that then oftentimes have like excellent conceptual relationships, but sometimes they're more formal or structural. Yeah. And for me, this video was such a fun, one of the things that comes up in that black and white work, because it is so like pared down, is that people are really like, when I have studio visits or conversations like this, they're really engaged in the variety of things that I'm looking at to pull together or to make the images I am. And so that was in some ways where this video came from, even though I think it really took a life of its own. But it's also been a segue to what I've been working on in the studio a little bit like this in 2021, now that I've been back in the studio. And where I kind of, I wonder, I'm not really sure where I'm going here. Yeah, so this,
Yes.
yeah, I mean, and I don't have, I realized when you and I were like touching base at the beginning that I don't have a great detail of this, but I can like zoom in and pan around. But, and actually I can start from the center, which is this Dali image. And that is the title of the work, is the Dali work, which is, so it's drawing back the golden fleece. I actually think there's more in the Dali title. And so I am going through this archive and more explicitly pulling together, well, I guess I'm not more explicitly pulling them together, but I'm explicitly putting them in front of the camera now.
Yes.
And it came, you said mood board earlier, like in the right before COVID, right before quarantine, I was in the process of trying to figure out some shoots with other female identifying artists. And so I was putting together mood boards for them of like poses and asking them for their inspiration. And so maybe when I'm also talking about these conversations becoming really explicit, it was during this time, like right before COVID, where people were giving me things that were like really like the artworks or ads that were really influential to them. And then we would have these great conversations. So I started making these tableaus that in my brain, in the origin, because I've been looking at all these art history books, like I'm sure for any of us who've taken our history class, like there's always like some kind of artifact floating on it was like pre-Photoshop, like just floating on a color field kind of. So I sort of wanted to make these like highly saturated tableaus, but put all of these images in conversation. And then, I'm also using one of the artworks as like an anchor point for a title and content.
Yeah, it's really sensitive, both to your color palette, certainly within the figuration, the positioning, the composition, the scale, the large and small. And, just while you're looking at the composition, I mean, it is very considered. I appreciate that. I heard you say, so just clarify, you're taking these images, are you printing them, cutting them out, putting them onto an overall mood board, or whatever you want to say, canvas? And
it's like a set kind of, yeah.
So it's a set. Okay.
Yeah. So you could see like the shadows on the ground here of where things are sitting, kind of.
Okay, yeah, no,
so they're kind of, it's a shallow set, like this maybe, but there's sort of, I'm hanging them with like fishing line and then editing out the fishing line in post. Yeah. And it's really like, it's hard to figure out, like you said, I'm thinking a lot about color. I think earlier work prior to the black and white work, color was really at the fore of kind of how I put things together. And so that's important, but figuring out the scale and the relationship between, like the relationship, like I wanted for this one to, I sort of compositionally have them, all the women that are facing right on the left side, all the women that are facing left on the right side. So it kind of moves in. but trying to figure out like what needs to have more precedence is like trial and error. So there's a lot of, it's so silly to have to like, I'm like printing things out. And I'm like, oh, it's too big. I have to go back and
yeah, your printer seems very powerful. There's a lot of nice prints in there.
Yeah. But it's, you know, even with this work,
what printer are you using?
it's an Epson P800. So it's like a 17-inch wide printer. These are all like, the biggest print is probably on here is probably 8.5 by 11. But when I'm making like the prints that are behind me, I'm just having to panel them together so I can try to figure out scale, because my printer is, you know, like medium, it's modest size. Yeah.
And you have some other works been working on within the same theme.
Yeah, so some of these, I don't know, like this is really new, and I'm just, again, so this is like the blue room and it's taken from Picasso's Blue Room, but I was thinking about like, because this is a bather, the sort of history or the idea of the bather that's repeated, but then also knowing that, like, I feel like there are so many Picasso places that I could either choose to go to or just totally ignore that are way more offensive than where I've gone. But just thinking about his idea of like this being a depressive phase, and then going back to this idea of female hysteria, and playing with that here. And then Pink Nude, this is like a Matisse's Pink Nude. And it's funny that this one ended up being kind of also more, there's so many like women in repose, but these are almost like, I mean, I don't think of them as mood boards anymore, but they do feel like fast ways for me to work out ideas. And also really like, because they're highly saturated, I sort of love how lush they are and like evocative. But then, like I said earlier, like I feel like in some ways, I don't think it's fair to say they're explicit, but they're probably more explicit than the black and white work. So there is this like kind of bringing you in and like, I don't know, inviting comparisons between vernacular photographs, art historical objects, soft porn, and where all this fits together.
Yeah, and even the presentation of this one archival pigment print, it really fools the eyes. I mean, even when I, full screen this bad girl, it's just such subtle nuance of, oh, that is a shadow. I mean, it feels like it could easily be Photoshopped, similar to the or Nike video that you created. And the analog or the mano a mano, it just is so fantastic to know that, because I think so many viewers will come through and just be like, oh, it's just like, craft some images thrown together in Photoshop. But it's nice to see that you're so tactile with this.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I especially after this year, I want to spend like as little time staring at a screen as possible. But in general, I think that the way that I work out things is by like touching and moving things around. And when I used to go out into the world and make photographs more, it was like that is part of it, is like absorbing. So it's hard. I think I get stuck more sitting in front of a computer. Yeah. So I'm making these, and then I only have 2 others that are kind of more recent, but they're very different. Though I see them all really in conversation, all 5 of these last ones. But so in some ways, this is like the hybrid of the black and white work and those tableaus, where I'm still looking at, in this case, I'm trying to look at things that were more specifically photographs that influenced me, or artworks that influenced me when I was like a teenager, and didn't really, often there's surrealist works where I was definitely not thinking about women being severed or disembodied, and just like thought they were super cool. And then I'm trying to find ways to answer them. So this is a Paul Outerbridge photograph, which is called Spirit Rising. I think it's called Phoenix Rising, Spirit Rising Out of Matter. So I've named it Spirit Rising Out of Matter. And this portion of it is his photograph, but I've re-photographed myself and then placed a camera and a mirror as a way to kind of like look back at the viewer. um, rather than and that's sort of a formal move, right? Like, I guess I could have kept my head down below looking up, but I wanted to kind of have like an answer to this male plaster head that I think might be Aries with this camera eye looking back.
Yeah, you can, it's very considered the way you're putting the composition. I didn't even realize that until you mentioned. And have you ever seen the work of Hans Braider?
Yes. Ugh, I love it. And then, well, what were you gonna say?
Just it reminds me, with obviously any female is putting a mirror on
Yeah.
themselves, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, he's, you know, I think he just recently passed in 2018,
17, 18. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I newly discovered him, I think 2016 or 17. I saw a show with him at Danziger. It's kind of like his last hurrah.
Yeah.
But please share with me what you were going to say about Hans Braider.
Well, I guess I just, I haven't taken a deep dive. So this is just like, cocktail talk, but it's like, I love that work, but it's just, it's the same thing, right? Like, I'm so drawn to this idea of like how he's using the camera and how it's like this kind of the mirror and this multiplying of the body or these optical illusions. And like, in some ways I can get really seduced. And then I'm like, oh, but it's still this male author it just becomes then like it loses its power, or it doesn't lose its appeal, because I still think they're beautiful photographs. But I just want more women. I'm just filling my life with more women makers. That's maybe the end of that.
Right, and leave it, far be it from me, find of course like an old white male to right now. And I understand that soon, the vocabulary will increase so much as the comeuppance in relationship to those that have been marginalized within the art world, which everyone other than we know. So and as there's these conversations constantly just churning about the male gaze and just saying fuck the male gaze. It's like, if I'm going to be drawing a self-referential or photographing myself, it isn't for a male gaze. I'm looking at my body every day as as anyone that's grown up with a female,
biologically female,
or feels female, or like that idea of the male gaze, just it's never felt like, smart is not the right word. It doesn't feel intelligent. Like, wait, the male's looking at the female, but females look at themselves every single day. But why don't they just say the lustful gaze, or why don't they say the predatory gaze, or why don't they say, or I mean, obviously I'm really going off the deep end. I don't want to get too overboard.
No.
But it does, that female gaze. It doesn't need to be turned into, women just drawing men with erect cocks,
Right.
So and so
I think for so long, and I'll just speak for myself, like I've looked at myself through the male gaze, so through the lens of how men have depicted women. And so I think that one of the things early in making this work, or even now, like with using my own body, it's like, do I am I putting the same thing into the world? I don't really know. But I mean, I don't think I could have made this work in my 20s. I don't, for a variety of reasons, but it's like, particularly as a woman in her 40s, I feel like I have a lot of I've lived with this body, and I feel like I didn't talk about this with the black and white work, but I don't retouch any of, I don't retouch any of that. So the skin is really left. If I have a cut, I'll retouch that, but I'm not retouching out like cellulite or wrinkles or moles or any of these things. And I feel like that allows me to see myself the way that I see all of the other women or all the other people in my life. And think about, it feels like very significant and nuanced at the same time.
I know, and I just have to just put it real quick, put one last period on it. Just it annoys me so much because in a heteronormative world, that male gaze, alludes to the fact that they're looking at females lustfully, or the way that they're, or so yeah, I really hope that those dialogues, we can change the nomenclature of just, using words that aren't so gender specific as well.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I think the Gen Zers are really going to help us do that.
Yeah, I mean, I teach and I really I see the change every year, how much I learn also, but just see that everything becomes more, yeah, I mean, I could use the word fluid, but it's not, it's just part, they're natives, right? They're natives to gender fluidity. They're natives to it's gonna happen. It's just gonna not, we're gonna be kind of at the tail end, I think, of the old guard.
But it is really, it's fascinating that you're kind of taking the femme mystique and you're turning it up over its head, and just kind of you're there's a fantastic irony to it all, right? By using your own body, by it's like reclaiming the word queer, or in that
I've never thought about that. Yeah.
Analogy. And I mean, it does, there's sensitivities there, and it's not always easy to talk about, yet it's important work, and it's important to begin these dialogues about, and even like Roxane Gay with the whole bad feminist, value those thoughts as to what kind of I don't know, feminist is, what is, how are you to fit yourself in such a small mold. I definitely think I'm a bad feminist, and I really enjoy it. It's
yeah. I mean, I think that it's actually, it's probably, I mean, this photograph, the last one here, I'm really, really mournful of having my face here. But I feel like this kind of speaks to what you're talking about, because I am really thinking about the way that sort of, the reference is, I don't know if anyone knows Dali's Dream of Venus pavilion in the World's Fair. And then many photographers, or not many, but several photographers worked with him to make these photographs of, these were some of his costumes. So my idea was to kind of recreate, he was really obsessed with lobsters, and then there are these oysters in her hand, and this idea of aphrodisiacs, but also he thought about lobsters as male castration. And anyway, so to where you were going in terms of bad feminism, it's a real fast leap. I was sort of trying to think about what would be my contemporary answer to this photograph. And so I have a yoni egg and a jade roller, and I tried to have some nails that have lobster-esque look, and I have my skims. And so I'm really thinking about this idea of capitalist feminism, and that we're not only having to think about womanism and the idea of lifting people up, but we're having to navigate a capitalist feminist world where all these products can make us have more agency over ourselves, and that makes us feminist, and we're always optimizing. And I was reading Gia Tolentino's Trick Mirror. She has this essay about optimization, where she talks about how the image can change. We can decide we don't want retouched images of women, and that's feminist, but the image will just change and adapt. So we're always sort of it's always marketing to whatever that feminist impulse is. So how do you not be a bad feminist? I mean, I know it's a leap from Roxane Gay, but
right. It's definitely food for thought. And the work, I'm glad this is your last image, and we kind of ended with this kind of departure to this question. I mean, I'm just thinking about that. And we're at 1900 hours. I mean, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You did 6 minutes. Good work, Kim.
All right.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you so much, Kim, for sharing your work with us and, you know, really doing the deep dive. You got folks, Molly McKinley, such stunning work, Lauren Silverman,
Yay.
gorgeous work.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. If you missed anything, it'll be up on the YouTube channel in the next few days, but stay cool.
Yes,
And
back
have a
at
good
you.
one. Good luck with your move, too.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right.
All right, guys. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.